And now, two guys who survived the first Red Dawn movie, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 55 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, we survive reality TV and help you plan for disaster. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan,
and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today's show is sponsored by Cat's Coffee. If you're looking for truly exceptional coffee to help you survive the morning or the next zombie apocalypse, you need to be drinking Cat's. They specialize in the finest coffee from sources that prioritize environmental responsibility and are fair trade certified. Their goal is to achieve perfection in every cup. Check them out at Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com, or click on their bright green banner on the site and make sure you're dealing with an official sponsor of the show. Again, that's Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com. All right, so today we are going to kind of give a review and critique of the new television show Doomsday Preppers, and we're also going to then segue into a survival strategy. And what is a survival strategy for modern day practical preparation? So with that, I guess we can kind of go ahead and launch into the TV show. And I'll give my opinion on it in this way, that it is both asinine and entertaining at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Like a lot of reality TV. I mean,
yeah.
I think that's a good way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. And that really is... The show's very much proven itself to be just another reality television show. And I think the author John Heatherly passed me some kind of a letter that the Survival Mom, we'll put a link to her show in the show notes for those that are not aware of her work, that she was one of the people that was in the original pilot of the show. I guess that was 9 months ago or something. And she pretty much went off on it and said how the production was completely staged, and the producers of the show very clearly from the beginning had an objective of trying to sensationalize preparedness and try to make all of the people on the show look as insane as possible.
Right, which, I'm going to look at it the same way you are, asinine entertaining. From that entertainment point of view, they're looking for ratings. So if you're looking for the show to be an educational tool, it's not necessarily a good thing to do, because again, the producer's goals is to get as many eyes on it as possible. And if you look at the overall population, most people aren't preppers.
No.
So, and most people really do have a strange view of preppers, especially when you put it in the context of a show like that.
Yeah. And I will disagree a little bit. There is some stuff that can be taken away. Some of the people's plans are pretty interesting. Yeah. Yep. They've, a lot of what you see are people that have come up with unique ways of preparedness. And I think, obviously, they've sensationalized. So they've picked the people that have done very large endeavors for becoming prepared. And
right.
So, but it, it still gives you ideas. Like there was one guy in the last episode that was doing methane production using pig and human waste. And he was actually doing a really good job of it and had a nice production going. And
I thought that was really good. That methane recapture system that he had was really neat. I that's one of the things that I'll be looking into. I know you found it interesting as well. So that's kind of one of those. The other thing, I'll agree with you also, there was good information in the show. So, for instance, I found I didn't find it consistent, but I found the advice that reviewer group gave to be pretty good based on the review they were doing. I didn't find it consistent throughout all the reviews. And you and I talked about this a little bit, but that whole idea that, if there was a hole in two areas, they only mentioned it one time, not both times.
Yeah, well, between I guess we can just call them contestants, because the thing is set up like a game show almost.
Yeah, you're right.
And that was, I have two issues with the people that are giving the critiques. One, the show has never identified who is actually doing it. They've called it practical preparedness, but I don't know. Try to run a search on Google for practical preparedness. A whole lot of stuff is going to come up. So they've never clearly defined who these people are and what their background is that's giving the critiques. Now, the critiques they're giving, like you said, are good.
Right.
But there's an inconsistency, just like you were just saying, in that the two different contestants on the show will have the same hole, and they'll mention it for one person, but they won't mention it for the other person. And at the same time, I can't figure out, are they actually tailoring the advice and critique that's being given to what that contestant's concern is? And by concern, I'm talking about whatever their survival concern is, because that's the other thing. Each of the contestants on this show they're concerned about one thing usually, and it's kind, and it's the typical gambit. I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but all of the contestants it's the typical gambit of survival concerns. So, polar shifts, or the switching of the polar caps, or magnetic poles.
Right. They didn't go after anybody who was concerned about the next earthquake or hurricane or tornado.
Yeah.
They went after the big sensationalized stuff. At one point, and joking a little bit, not joking a little, I almost expected one of the people to be concerned about the next big zombie apocalypse. I mean, based on the big, huge things they were talking about. Now, I'm not downplaying anything, and the chances of big things happening and whatever, and what the odds of those people's concerns actually happening are. I'm not going to argue those. What I am going to say is I really did. I was just sitting there waiting through the show going, all right, next guy is going to be concerned about zombie apocalypse, and he's going to have a 22 and night vision goggles.
Okay. I'm throwing this out there now, that if Nat Geo wants to do a show on zombie preparedness, I think you and I should be willing to do it.
I'm willing already.
I'll wear the tinfoil hat on the show. Just do it. I will never mention this podcast while doing that show, but I'm willing to be that jackass.
Oh, yeah, I'll buy the night vision goggles. I mean, I'll go get them. And then I will put on my zombie camo. And I'll do it.
Okay, as a quick side note, Ron and I were hanging out. Ron Davis from EMS Newbie podcast. We're hanging out the other night, having coffee. And he said, oh my God, have you seen, and I don't remember I think it was the new Cheaper Than Dirt catalog. And I'm like, no, I don't get that. I try not to get catalogs. I think they're dumb. I like to go online. And he's like, all right, I got to show it to you. He brings it back, and on the front cover of Cheaper Than Dirt, they had a new AR-15 that had a zombie camo pattern, where if you look carefully at the camo pattern, it's actually made up by zombies.
That's awesome.
And I was just like, oh my God.
That's what I'll be wearing for our debut in the Nat Geo zombie episode. Because, I mean, but kidding aside, it almost felt that way.
Yeah.
And that was the sensation. But to be fair to them, that was the sensationalism they were going for.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it really does go back to just perpetuating the myth of what survival has come to mean in the last, I'm going to say, 5 years, where people have started to take a practical approach to it. Been willing to say that they're survivalists, but also giving the caveat of, I'm doing it practically. And a lot of the industry is starting to go that way. I mean, if you look, a lot of the blogs and a lot of the podcasts and a lot of people are really driving and going, hey, look, we don't have to focus on the crazy crap.
I think that was part of the problem with the show too. And at least the part that hit me wrong, which is I'm almost, and I'm knowing that there's very little difference between the two. Mm-hmm. When people mock the concept of survivalists, I'm almost okay with that. But when you mock practical prep, I actually do have a problem with that, because to me, practical prep, I was, and I'm gonna tell a quick little story. Last night, actually, I was talking to some family members, and one of them had brought up the idea that people working and fighting and struggling for what they have. And she had mentioned that, her parents, through the Depression and everything, they knew what it was like to have to work for things, to save. to be prepared for something that might happen that you're not expecting. And the first thing I thought of was, yeah, most Depression era people would probably be referred to today as preppers. But we've taken the term and really turned it into this whole idea of, yeah, prep. And this is why I was joking about the zombie apocalypse thing, because they've taken the term prepper and they've made it almost this thing that's almost dirty. It's something to mock. At least that's the way I felt they were doing it. And that kind of, that was a little bit insulting. And that's one of the reasons I think, Aaron and I both have lots of different reasons for doing the show, but we also have very similar ones for doing the show. And I think one of the things I felt is a lot of the reason we do this show week to week is because we want to change the impression that people have of what it means to be a prepper.
Oh, absolutely.
And there really is something, the show I think had a much different idea of what an urban prepper was. For those of you who watched it, you know what I'm talking about. But in my mind, an urban prepper is us. It's normal people who have normal jobs and normal lives. We're not necessarily worried about the next meteor hitting the planet or the next great zombie apocalypse. We joke about it because it's fun to joke about. I mean, who doesn't like kidding around? But at the same time, what we are worried about is the normal things. And it could be a mudslide in California. It could be fires in California. It could be fires in Texas or hurricanes in Texas. It could be a blizzard in the Northeast. It could be any of those things. And those are things that you want to be practically prepared for. And I guess I find it, to me, it's insulting when you take people who are prepared for those kinds of things or even losing a job. When I looked at some of the people on that show and I saw their food stores, the first thing I thought of it was if I was out of work for a few months, having a food store like that would be a huge lifesaver. I mean, imagine not having to spend money on food for 3 months while you're out of work. I mean, that to me is just huge. You might be able to pay your mortgage because you don't have to spend money on food.
Yeah, and that's some of the stuff we've talked about, and that's
Right.
the point we've really tried to hammer for over a year now, which is if you're prepared for the normal day-to-day stuff,
Right.
you are 80% of the way there towards the big stuff. And we've never said that there aren't big things that really do worry us. There are definitely big things that worry us, but they're not the things we focus on because as we went along through our journey in prep, we came to the point where we realized, wait a minute, we don't have to live in fear of the zombie apocalypse or the meteor happening or the big earthquake or whatever. If we're prepared for stuff that is likely to happen to us in our life, we will also be prepared for those big things without having to be terrified of them.
Exactly. And I think that's the reason that was my biggest issue with the show.
Yeah, the show, to point blank, really does not even the show really does piss me off, and that it perpetuates the common belief that survival or preparedness is a dirty thing and not dirty in a fun way.
Yep.
And I'm even not knocking any of the people on the show and what they were concerned about, because that to me, if that's what you're concerned about and that's what's driving you towards preparedness, that's fine. That's your own business. I would make fun of you to your face, but I wouldn't make fun of you in public generally, and probably only to your face if we were friends or something, because I would be joking around. If that's really
right.
is to me.
And honestly, if I was talking to those people, I'm pretty sure that most of the people who go to that level of prep have more practical concerns as well.
Oh, absolutely.
They just didn't cover that in the show, and I think that's the disservice that they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think that part of the problem that I guess I really have with it, if this was on Fox or a regular network, I could almost be okay with it being sensational like this. But when a channel like Nat Geo or the Science Network or one of those does something like this, I expect a little bit more education.
Yeah.
And that's the issue that I've got with it most. Like they're positioning it as more than just some sensational reality show. They're almost positioning it as a educational reality show, and it doesn't come across that way at all.
Mm-mm. No, it doesn't, and that's the shame of them. And I think this kind of goes back to a conversation that we were having before the show about businesses and strategy and knowing where you're going, and this is where they're grasping at straws, trying to get ratings for a network that is possibly lagging because most people don't really want to sit down. I mean, we do, but I know a lot of people. I mean, Jen, my girlfriend, for example, does not like sitting around watching documentaries
Right.
and educational programming. And it's not. I'm not speaking one way or the good, bad, or indifferent about it. It is what it is. Some people like it, some people don't. There are certain documentaries I think are boring as hell.
Right.
And so that's the problem. When you watch, like you were saying a second ago, when you're watching Nat Geo or the Science Channel or something, you're expecting a documentary. You're expecting to be educated. You're not looking for reality TV.
Exactly, and I think for both of us, that's kind of the heart of it. And like I said, I would have just preferred if they covered some more practical things. But you know what? Then again, we're here, so
yeah. And I do want to point out some other kind of stupid things that I noticed in the show, and one of which was there was a couple that had done kind of a cool job building a fortress, for lack of a better word, out of steel shipping containers. And in the show, they shot at them.
I know where you're going with it.
Yeah, they shot at them with a 22. They backed up 100 yards. Not that really matters, other than safety. But they backed up 100 yards and shot at their house with a 22. And they're like, we're going to test how, whether or not this thing can withstand a siege.
Yeah, well, that's the part the biggest problem I had, actually, was that they backed up 100 yards. It's like, come on, the 22 was bad enough, but now you're taking the 22 out 100 yards.
Well, the thing's going to ricochet off, so I'm glad that they did. But and their point was, well, this is the most common round. Not for somebody looking. Nobody is going to try to take your home in the name of whatever with a 22, and if they are, just sit there and laugh at them because they're idiots.
Now, personally, I have no idea what a 308 would do up against a cargo container.
Well, that's what I want to see.
I'd like to see it. I'm kind of curious now. Seems like it's worth a movie or a video at some point. We'll see if we can do that. But I do know that there's no chance that a 22 is going to take on a cargo container.
No, and here was my other big issue with it. They changed, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but they actually changed the sound the rifle made.
Yes.
When I heard it, I was like, I couldn't place it.
But the other thing I noticed was they didn't fire at the thinner part of the steel. They actually fired at one of the corner support beams.
Yeah.
So basically they were firing at a very thick piece of steel. Like, we're not even talking about just the thin steel that makes up the walls.
Mm-hmm.
They were firing at the support beam.
Yeah. But the sound that they changed it to was a much larger, slower moving round.
That was probably a 308.
It didn't even sound like a 3. Whatever it was, it also sounded like the sound itself had been overworked in an audio studio. It was not a natural rifle sound.
A fake bullet sound.
It really kind of was. And I would understand why they would do that, because a 22 would sound stupid shooting at a metal shipping container.
Right. The bing off the metal would have been louder than the report of the rifle.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were other goofy little things like that in the show. So, but I guess to kind of close out the thoughts, at least for me, it was... It really was. It was, just the same thing I said in the beginning. It was an asinine show that is sadly entertaining to watch.
I completely agree with your assessment, and I'm going to add one thing just for everybody listening and say, so we're out here talking about things in a practical way, and we joke around too. We do our October Zombie Month and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, it's all about practical prepping, and we've said it a few times. Go out there, talk to people. All of you out there listening to the show are like us. We like to consider all of ourselves kindred spirits, whatever it might be, practical urban preppers. And the more we talk about this in a sane, not so blown out way, the harder it is for people to make it look insane. So it's kind of like, talk to people. Don't talk about it as the next meteor hitting or the next comet hitting or whatever it might be. It's all about, so what happens if you lost your job? What would you do? And then you could say, hey, I've got a month worth of food. And if I lost my job, then I'm ready for that. What would you do? And if you frame it that way, that'll click for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you put it in a context of what are the concerns of the average person today.
Yep.
And how does preparedness take care of those concerns?
Right. And usually the zombie survival kit that you can buy from Gerber doesn't take care of those concerns.
Unless zombies really do become a major concern for people.
I'm ready. Just in case, I've got one of those shotguns in the glass ready to go.
Those are pretty cool.
I'm not even going to go to my regular gun safe. I'm going straight for my zombie gun.
Oh, yeah.
just for that. Because, the regular guns, they won't do.
No, it's got to be specially tailored for killing zombies.
Right, and I'm going to pull out my Hornady zombie ammo, of course.
Well, yeah, there's a brilliant marketing scheme right there, which we've joked about before.
Again, I don't blame them either.
No.
I think I have a box now. I mean, not admitting anything, but there is the possibility that I maybe have one box.
That's awesome. But I think segueing into the second part of the show, and the reason we're putting these two together, since we talked about in part that the show does kind of break down what these people are concerned about and what are they doing to prepare for that. We've talked in the past about making decisions and setting objectives, and we're going to recap that a little bit today, but it's all kind of under the umbrella of what is your survival strategy and how do you define that? To start that off, we'll kind of recap setting objectives. First, to set objectives, we have to really understand what is our concern? What is it that worries you the most? What not necessarily keeps you up at night, but maybe if it does, I hope it doesn't, but if something keeps you up at night, is that what you're preparing for? Are you preparing for hurricanes? Are you preparing for job loss? Are you preparing for tornadoes? Are you preparing for droughts in your area? What are you, or even something bigger like the financial collapse of the world, or something smaller like the financial collapse of the United States, which may or may not be one and the same thing. There's a lot of questions we have to ask ourselves so that we know where we're going, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. We were kind of joking around before the show a little bit about a project that I'm involved in that very much kind of feels like somebody's just throwing those super bounce balls that you get out of the gumball machine, and then it's just dumping a bucket of them, and then, okay, chase them. Because there's no real plan in place.
Right. A lot of our listeners might actually like the analogy of shoot, aim.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not a good way to do things. You want to aim first and then take your shot. So define your concern.
Mm-hmm.
And you might even want to take a look at it. I'll add one in here about it. It's, define the concern and then really think about the probability of that concern, and weigh it against the other concerns you've got.
And then once you've clearly defined that, break it on down to what are the pieces of that concern.
Mm-hmm.
If you just say, I'm worried about a financial collapse, well, what does that mean?
Right.
Not just in the sense of the dollar loses all its value tomorrow. What does it really mean? How is that going to affect your life? What are the different problems that are going to occur from that? There's going to be food shortages, commerce in general will become more difficult. People will be more difficult to deal with, and crime may shoot through the roof.
And you also have to weigh it all with a sense of reality. Just because a financial collapse happens, you may still have a job to contend with every day. You may still have a commute you still have to do. You may have those things still in place just to pay the basics of bills and things like that. I mean, in economic collapses that have happened in other places around the world, when those do happen. And again, I'm not endorsing or not endorsing that idea, but let's just use that as an example. We've seen economic collapse happen in places, but that doesn't mean people don't go to work anymore. That doesn't mean you don't still need to feed your family. It doesn't even, and to use, was it Argentina? Is that where that book's about?
Yeah.
To use that as an example, one of the things he talks about is if he had some things to invest in again, it would have been a bigger TV because he spent a lot of time at home watching movies. That's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, the fact that he wasn't able to go out at night anymore. You couldn't go to a movie theater or go dancing or go drink at a bar because it became dangerous at night and things just got a little strange. So he was thinking, I'd like to have a nicer TV, maybe a better DVD player.
Mm-hmm.
Things like maybe I should have bought a few more movies. I mean, that kind of thing. And that is somebody who can look at it in retrospect, but thinking in terms of, his experiences and other people's experiences as well. What does it actually mean to you? How does it impact you? What would you like to have in a situation like that? We all know about food, water, and things like that, but there's also other creature comforts that you're accustomed to that might just be nice. Sitting at home with your wife and your kids watching a movie might be nicer on a 52-inch TV than a 32-inch TV. I'm not encouraging anyone to go out and buy a giant TV.
Oh man, but I was actually online right now buying a bigger TV.
Well, I'm using it as a way to justify my own buying a bigger TV, but not it. And if you need to use it that way too, feel free. But it was just that's one of those things that just stuck out at me. I think a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
because it's not something I would normally consider.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do consider the fact that you're bugging in essentially every night, well, what do you do when you bug in every night? Make sure you have a lot of books. I mean, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think that also kind of lends itself to kind of the next question you have to ask yourself is how long will it take to clear up? Because as we've
Right.
talked about before, society will always end up righting itself,
Hmm.
excluding nuclear war, giant meteors hitting the earth, and maybe even then.
Yeah, I'd even say nuclear war would probably eventually, maybe certain areas might not be fun to go to, but eventually things will get normal again, or at least whatever normal becomes.
Hmm. And so you have to figure out how long and how much and what do you need to prepare for that length of time. And I think that in itself, that's one of those questions that people don't usually stop to think about. We talked about preparing for 3 weeks, but that was just kind of a basics show. It's
Right.
and it was a generalization because we can't talk about every single major concern or even minor concern. I guess if we did the show more often, we could. If we just wanted to fill the airwaves with just more stuff.
Oh, exactly. Well, and just using the example, let's use a crazy example right now, right? So, and or not so crazy, a very real example. So let's just use numbers that are out there published. I'm not going to argue with them; it's not worth it. Let's just say 8.5% of the population's unemployed. Using that as a number, so we're pretty close to 10%. But let's say 8.5%, and the average unemployment, or not average unemployment, but unemployment's now extended out to 99 weeks. 99 weeks is an awfully long time. That's almost 2 years. Now, I don't know what those of you listening have as income or anything else, but unemployment pretty much caps out, depending on where you are in the country, but just give or take, at like $400 to $500 a week. That's the max. If you have a mortgage that you're trying to keep paid, that might cover your mortgage. I mean, it depends on where you live again and all that kind of stuff, but let's just pretend that covers a mortgage. Well, you still need to eat. And if you have a food store, well, that covers you for a period of time. But 3 weeks might not be enough. Maybe it's, for those of you who have 3 months, this is a way for you to justify a 3-month food store. For those of you that more, hey, that's another. It's just more food to have that you don't have to be paying for. You've already made the investment, so now you're dipping into your insurance policy because to you that is a disaster. And not only is it a disaster, but if it's happened to you, then the probability is now 100%. So you utilize it. And that's why when we talk about a lot of these things, we put a basic time period on it, but we can't tell you exactly how long you need to be on anything because it depends. And I know that that's it's not a cop out per se, but you wish you had a better answer. Well, so do we. I mean, I think Aaron and I would both like to know exactly how long our next personal disasters will last so that we could plan for it.
I'd kind of like to know what the next personal disaster is going to be.
Exactly. I'd like to know beforehand. And you know what's funny? If I knew beforehand and I knew exactly how long it would last, I might be able to plan around it.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to something we said a long time ago that bad things don't come to you and say, "Hey, I was thinking about throwing some crap your way next Tuesday. Does that
Yeah.
work out for you? And does that give
Man,
you enough time to kind of figure yourself out around it?"
I'm going to thank the next prom that does that for me.
I
I mean, I'll give him a big handshake, pat on the back, hug, the whole bit.
You let me know who that is, and I'll be sure to request him in my next disaster kind of life
Well,
meeting I
as part of my prep, I might go hire a fortune teller.
have.
Um, I'm just saying. I mean, a good one,
A good one.
not one of those corner of the street kind of people that jip you.
No,
I'm
no,
going
no.
for I want a real fortune teller.
And I think this kind of lends itself to one of the questions, and we talked, and as a community, we talk so often about bugging out and bug out bags and bugging in. If you've defined what your concern is or what your concerns are, that will also help you in the decision making process of understanding whether or not bugging in or bugging out is appropriate to your situation. And I think everyone should have some plans in place for both
Hmm.
because both are practical,
Right.
regardless of what disaster we're talking about. It could be something so simple as bugging out, meaning leaving the city or state you're in to go somewhere that is more financially viable
Right.
for your needs. Or it could be that you have to bug out because some natural disaster has laid waste to your area.
Right. On a statistical swag, though, like if I just had to do a random guess at numbers, I'm going to guess, and I'm not even going to throw out a real number because it's going to be complete BS. But if I had to guess, I would guess that most situations, actually, most general prep situations are more about bugging in than they are about bugging out. And a lot of the bug out stuff ends up being pretty short term. Like I know in hurricanes, I'm a bug out kind of guy. Aaron's a bug in kind of guy. So, and of course, if you're in an evacuation zone, then just get out. But, you have to make personal decisions about where you are, where your family is, what your personal preparedness looks like. So each situation might actually have different outcomes for different people, even if you've got very similar prep strategies.
Absolutely. You kind of touched on it there for a second, which is also you have to figure out what your needs are.
Right.
Are you by yourself? Do
Yep.
you have children? Do you have a spouse? And then we kind of come into, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day that you really have to plan around that. Does that affect your bug in or bug out plans?
Right.
Because your responsibility as a prepper is also to ensure the safety and survival of those around you.
Right. Your family. I
Mhm.
mean, then, and even beyond family, you may have friends that you're very close with that you can help.
Mhm.
If you can, do it. This is all about community too. Throughout all this, always remember we haven't talked about it that much this year, but the survival chi idea. It's all about your community, your health, your intelligence. All of that plays into every decision you make along this path.
Oh, yeah. But I think in the most simple terms, figuring out when to bug out, when to bug in, or even when to take in people, friends, whatever, or give out
Right.
food or whatever, you choose the path that jeopardizes yourself and those that your immediate loved ones the least.
Yep. Most definitely.
So if we really are in a bad situation and somebody comes to our door, and maybe they're a close friend even, but we are at a point where our food stores are at levels that we do not have food to give out to them, and it's like, hey, I'm sorry, if you're asking me to make a choice between my child being fed or you being fed, well, I'm going to pick my child.
Right.
I'm not going to try. I'm not dicking around with that. I'm not going to try to stretch that out. I'm not going to try to justify it. No, sorry. I brought that person into the world. They are my responsibility for however long deemed necessary, and for as long as that is, they are my number one goal. The rest of the world can go screw.
Right. And if you're like if you're like Jeep, then your child may be eating you out of house and home. It's still your responsibility to feed that person.
Exactly.
At least until they're 18.
Yeah, at least until you can send them off to the military or something and let them
Exactly. Let them feed them.
let them feed them. So that's the basics of dealing with both of those situations. Where are your best odds to bug out? You leave the moment that becomes a better option for you, for your survival and for those in your immediate charge.
Right. And just talking about that bugging in, bugging out thing, though, the idea, one of the decisions you have to make is it is often, unless you are in direct danger where you are, it is often safer to stay where you are. Remember, by exiting your home, you have to become mobile, and you're putting yourself in multiple forms of danger along that path. So, depending on what's going on, you may find that keeping your door locked, staying inside, staying away from windows if it's a hurricane, things like that, become much safer than getting in your car and trying to go somewhere.
As long as we're talking about bugging out, we
Hmm.
did a whole show on survival bags. And I
Yeah.
think we'll do another show on survival bags in the future and really kind of go over them again. And I think we're even going to have Jason McConnell, the Redneck Resource, on, because I know he's in the middle of putting together his bags. But in the context of this show, survival bags, while they're, I think, one of the most commonly talked about and one of the most commonly obsessed over pieces of people's survival plans and gear, survival bags really, we've talked about how they are helpful in everyday life. And if you have an appropriate bag in your car and you have, so we had the technical difficulties for a second there. Sorry, we're going to have a cut in the middle of in that section. To kind of go back over bags, these bags are there for both when it's time to bug out, when it's time to bug in, but they also have practical applications. There's if you get stuck out somewhere or if you just need something, your bag makes sure that you have all of the basic and essential things needed to get you either to, from, or through an issue.
And remember, there is a difference between your everyday carry bag, which could be whatever it might be. I mean, mine's just a messenger bag that I also happen to have my work stuff in, like my laptop and things like that. But there's also there's your bug out bag, which is a different bag.
And then there's car bags, and there's a variety, and we'll link to the previous episode in the show notes, and we will in the future, probably in the next 2 episodes, come back and do another whole show about bags. But for right now, just know that that is a practical thing, and that is something that can help you out properly planned, whether we're talking about just little stuff that happens or we're talking about big things that happen and it's time to get out of Dodge.
Yep.
Another thing that I think a lot of people overlook is the need for exit routes. So if we're going to bug out, we've got to figure out how are we going to get out, and are our plans for getting out reasonable? Because we brought up a little while ago, what if you have a wife and a child, or what if you have somebody with you that's handicapped, and your plan includes traveling on foot? Is that reasonable for them, or are you pushing? To kind of go back to the Doomsday Prepper show, that was a couple of things that if you watch the original pilot, there were people that had absolutely no bug out plans, and then there was a woman in this last show that had a bug out plan. She had never tested it before, and I think she expected to be able to get to her bug out vehicle in 3 hours, and doing it on foot.
And taking a very long time. And I think the idea
9 hours, yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea there is don't overestimate your own capabilities either, especially in a disaster. So keep in mind, this is the way I like to look at it. A bunch of really bad things have just happened that are causing you to have to use whatever plan you have in place. And now all of a sudden you think that a trip that might have taken you 3 hours in perfect conditions is still going to take 3 hours. That's an unrealistic expectation, right? If it took you 3 before, or let's say you thought it was going to take 3, it actually took you 9, well then in real life, there's a good chance you're not getting to your car or whatever you had stashed wherever it is. So I think being realistic about what our own capabilities are is a really important thing here. And sometimes I overestimate my own capabilities. Sometimes I underestimate them. But to the point you were making, I think the idea of trying it out, seeing how it actually works and how something happens is important.
Yeah, and I think that is a very important thing. And then there's other aspects of it. Are you sure that all of the pieces of that exit strategy work? And that was one of the other things that came up in the show, was that person's plan was to bug out to Mexico.
Right.
There were 2 problems with actually, one of which that they didn't really bother to point out. But the first part was that, for ease of argument's sake, because I don't remember the exact numbers, but the truck that she had as her bug out vehicle, we'll say it had a 250-mile range with the gas tank on it, and the closest entry point to Mexico was 300 miles. So her bug out vehicle wasn't going to get her there to begin with. The other problem that she seemed to kind of overlook in it was that her concern was that there was going to be an oil crash, so that there was going to be no gasoline. But her assumption was that when she got to that 250-mile point, she would be able to barter, trade, or buy gasoline to get her to the rest of the way to her destination, which is in conflict with what she thought the disaster was in the first place. Because, wait a minute,
Right.
If there's no gas and there's a crash of the fuel system, where is this magical gas that you're going to be bartering from? And I'm not really making fun of it. I'm just pointing out that it is so easy to overlook and overestimate our plans and overlook the minutia of the plans that don't make it work.
None of this is about mocking anybody. It's really about evaluating and I think in the show that they did talk about that. Actually, that was one of the good critiques I thought they'd given her. Yeah, which is, hey, your truck's only going to go, I think it was 300 versus, Houston's 350 miles from Mexico at your best possible distance.
So we're having some internet connectivity issues today for our call. So if there's a couple gaps in the show, we're sorry. trying to figure out what the
Yeah.
issue is. But moving forward, yeah, they did bring up that her truck wasn't going to make it all the way. But the part that bugged me that they didn't bring up was that, hey, wait, if there's no gas,
Right.
or at least I don't think they brought it up.
They actually did. They brought up that part too. They
Oh,
did
okay.
a decent job of breaking that one down. What they didn't really talk about was that she was a single person, one human being, even armed. You're only so protected. I mean, you're making a 9 hour, or let's say even on a best possible chance trip, 3 to 5 hour trip, and even with a pistol, there's only so protected that you'd be. But again, those are all things that you have to consider when you consider you're bugging out. It's how do you really plan to get there? What's your exit route? And being realistic about everything in that plan.
Mm-hmm.
And actually being more than realistic, being a little bit of a pessimist. Maybe pessimist's not the right word here, but a realist with a little bit of assume that the difficulty is going to be much harder than you think it's going to be.
Oh, absolutely. And I think as we joked in the show with Jason McConnell, that everything that he and I tried to do ended up taking 2 or 3 times longer. And so it finally became a planning method for anything that he and I did, that however long we thought it was going to take, we would triple it. And I think that's the same thing in planning. And it goes back to the plan for the worst, hope for the best. And so it's, if you think your plan's going to be this, make it worse. Make whatever the problem is worse, and then it will probably be closer to accurate for whatever your concern is than what you initially thought.
Right.
Because we do have a tendency, all of us, to overestimate our abilities on a regular basis, or overestimate how easy something's going to be.
Or we put in our best possible scenario.
Oh, yeah.
Like, maybe I can run a mile in X time, but we haven't built in the fact that, all right, it's not 1 mile, it's 15 miles, and I can't average that speed over all 15. And on top of that, there's adversity and a bunch of other things, and it might be happening at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it's, oh, okay, maybe I should double my time or triple it even just to be safe.
Yeah. As long as we're bugging out and talking about that, we also need to talk about financial mobility. And what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
What do you need to be financially mobile? Because if you have to get up and go, and there is, let's say, some kind of collapse in the information systems, even if it's a brief interruption and you can't use credit cards, you have enough cash on hand, at least you get you out of town and get you through a few days at staying at a hotel. Or if you're more financially tight, do you have at least the gas money to get you out of town and to a friend's house where you can sleep on their couch for a few days or a week? And then even then, do you have the money to feed yourself once you go?
Right.
It's really also a question about liquidity. And I think if we're going to talk about even bigger stuff, how tied up is your money? How quickly can you get access to it? If you have a 401k and part of your bug out plan is to leave the country, well, it may take you a week to get that money if you even can out of that.
I mean, just simplifying it a little bit, right? So do you have enough liquidity? Well, I want enough when you make the decisions you make along the path, right? So we talked about you have to really decide a few things for yourself. When you're doing that, well, do you want enough liquidity to last you a weekend? A week. Maybe a week you could have in a safe. All right, I know that, over a week to eat is going to cost me X amount of dollars. You keep that amount of money in a safe, you're good to go. Or maybe liquidity, like Aaron was just saying, means, all right, I want to be able to hop my boat and head to an island somewhere. Well, if that's your plan, like you said, you want to make sure that you have things you have things planned out right. You're not going to be able to change necessarily the structure of your 401k to get any faster. But maybe you need to be putting a little bit more aside into other forms of investment that you can get to faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also lends itself to talking about information mobility. And we've talked about putting together personal information packets. And I think that was one of the other things that I've seen in the show is I've only ever seen in that show one person mention that they have their personal information with them. And it was the same girl that was part of her bug out plan was to go to Mexico, the one we were just talking about. Excuse me, not girl, woman. All of her stuff in digital format. And one of the problems with that is, what if wherever you're going or whoever you run into along the way has no way of accessing that information?
Right.
So let's say you come up against law enforcement and you have to be able to prove that if you're coming back to your home after a natural disaster, You can hand that sheriff's deputy that chip all day long, but he's standing on the highway and he has no way of accessing it. So the title to your home or your proof of residency is nil. He's going to turn you back, and you've got to figure out then how to get that information out of that chip.
I don't think in any way we're saying don't have it in digital format. It's you also want it in a certain documents, not everything, but certain documents also a printed format.
Oh, absolutely. And have them in some sort of protected, like even if it's just a Ziploc bag. But have physical copies as well as a digital. And it all goes back to, I mean, that's a big part of survival, is have redundancy in things.
Right.
And don't
and redundancy doesn't mean 2 SD cards.
No. don't have two of the same thing. 2 things or more in separate formats. Although I don't know any other format besides physical or digital that you could put your information in, but you get the idea.
Right.
Moving beyond that, we can kind of wrap things up. Once you've figured all this stuff out, start looking for where are the holes in your plan? Where can things go wrong?
And this is where having a friend really does help. Like Aaron and I talk about this stuff all the time. And sometimes it's kind of fun to play the little game of, and I don't think we do it intentionally, it ends up becoming part of conversation of, have you thought of? I mean, you don't want to attack somebody and say, oh, you got a giant hole there, you're going to die. But at the same time, it is kind of fun to look at plans, even when they're not your own. Like sometimes we will actually, and yeah, sure, we're prepper geeks. We'll sit around over drinks on a Saturday night and be talking about something like, all right, okay, so X, Y, and Z happens, and you've got to get from here to there. And then we'll start talking about it. And it is easy to say, hey, have you thought of this? And have you thought of that? And when we're thinking through that, it actually does help us with our regular plans. It's kind of like practice or strategic practice. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's a way to kind of think through, am I thinking about this properly? And when I talk about, am I going to get from Houston to Austin? Well, all right, have I thought through the fact that all the major highways are going to be clogged up? So how would I actually do that? And how long would it take me? And, along the way, do I know where the gas stations are? That kind of thing. And it lets you really think that through. So having somebody to work that through with, whether it's your best friend, your wife, your cousin Joe, whoever it might be, it's good to talk through your plan.
Something that happens a lot is that, and you'll even see it in the TV show, that the advice that these people get, they'll turn around and argue with.
Right.
That's a really bad habit to get into. The problem is these people have put so much energy into it that it's almost like that's part of their validation, is that they have these beautifully elaborate or wonderful plans. And often they will become defensive about those plans and not want to take the advice or not seriously consider the advice. And that's what you have to do when you're discussing these plans with friends, is really take to heart and really think about, before you try to give them a rebuttal of why that hole isn't a hole, really think about it. Maybe that even means that you have to focus and do something else for a little while and come back to it. But if somebody's willing to take their time to give you their opinion, take the time to really think about what they have to say and don't try to immediately argue why your plan is perfect, because I guarantee you it's not.
Yeah, none of us have perfect plans. Aaron and I know, even in the current plans we both have for different things, there are still holes, and we both know that. I mean, it's not, some of them are whole, and that's the other thing to keep in mind. Holes are going to come up, and some of them you can easily go, oh, well, you know what, I just didn't think of that, so here's the answer. And other ones you're going to go, I'm not sure I have a one answer solution for that. Maybe there's 50 different possibilities, and it really does depend. It becomes a choose your own adventure of prep planning.
Mm-hmm. To kind of give an example, I know one night Jason McConnell and I were sitting around and we were talking about extreme bug out plans. And this was not to be taken literally. It was just more of a wargaming, goofing around, having a drink and kind of joking around. But one of the bug out plans included stealing sailboats and leaving the country and sailing away to an island somewhere. But that did lend itself to, at the time and in the moment, we thought it was a brilliant plan. That might have been the cocktails we were drinking. But what we later found out the next day when I started researching sailboats out of curiosity was how small sailboats actually are and how many people you can and can't get on a sailboat and how big of a sailboat you would actually need for the number of people we were talking about including in this. And it was like, holy crap, we need like a pirate ship to get everybody out. And so
now we have a pirate ship.
Well, we might.
We will not talk about where it's docked.
The rabbit hole pirate ship. But, and I think that's the other thing too, is that you can't just come up with these brilliant ideas. You have to stop and question your own ideas and say, is that even possible? Because in that moment, we thought it was a brilliant idea, but when we went back and looked at it, it was impractical, at least for the number of people we were talking about involved in it.
I mean, the scurvy would have been a nightmare.
Well, yeah. Just take a big bag of lemons with you or something. Here, suck on a lemon. But you going back to plugging up holes, take a look at your shelter. Take a look at your energy. And by energy, do you have heating and cooling needs? Are there the very young or the very old with you that need to have, that maybe can't regulate their own body temperature as well? What are your food and water needs relative to the plans that you're making? And maybe add a little more. What are your security concerns? And what are your security holes within reason? Don't go play Rambo, but within reason.
Right. And keeping local laws in mind when you do that.
Well, yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a minute ago. One of the most important things that is so often overlooked, what is your redundancy of your plans and of your supplies?
Right.
So things to think about. Till next week. And with that, we wrap up episode 55. Thank you for joining us. If you like the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. And if you didn't, well, why not tell us about it using the contact form on the site? Seriously, the show's for you, the listener. And if you have something to say, we're listening. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you'll receive updates about the site, notifications of new articles, and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each episode where we invite you to comment on the show, interact with us, interact with each other, and let the world know what you're thinking. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.